If you are over 65 and your doctor has told you that slowing down, recovering longer, and losing muscle is simply part of getting older, you need to hear what research published in Nature, Cell Stem Cell, and the New England Journal of Medicine has found in the last 5 years, because the story most people have been told about aging is incomplete in a way that turns out to matter enormously. You were told your body slows down because cells die off and run out. That is not what is happening. At 65, you still have the vast majority of the stem cells you had at 25. They have not disappeared. They are present, but they have been largely shut down by a toxic internal environment your body is generating around them. And that environment is not fixed, it is modifiable. In the last 5 years, 3 separate research teams at Stanford, MIT, and Mount Sinai published findings that have genuinely changed how scientists think about aging stem cells. Not in a dramatic cure everything way, in a quieter, more precise way that has real implications for what you do starting this week. In the next 14 minutes, I am going to walk you through the 5 documented biological mechanisms that are suppressing your stem cells right now, the specific research that explains each one, and a 5-pillar practical protocol ranked by strength of evidence so you leave this conversation knowing exactly where to begin. I have spent years reviewing primary research in this field so I can translate what actually matters into language that helps real people make real decisions. What I am sharing today comes directly from peer-reviewed studies. I will be specific about which ones, what their limitations are, and what we can reasonably conclude. That is a promise I make on this channel. Before we go further, drop a comment right now with just one thing. How long does it take you to recover after physical effort? That used to feel easy? A day, 3 days, a week? I want to see those answers because what I am about to share applies very differently depending on whether you are 65, 72, or 82. And if you have noticed that wounds or minor injuries take noticeably longer to heal than they did 10 years ago, add the word slow to your comment. That detail is important, and you will understand exactly why in about 4 minutes. Here is what plays out in millions of households every single week. A 71-year-old man who has been active his whole life starts noticing that a muscle strain that used to resolve in 2 or 3 days now takes 2 weeks. He catches a respiratory infection and it lingers for 10 days when it would have lasted 2 at 40. He has not changed his habits, but his muscle mass is visibly eroding. He goes to his physician. Everything looks acceptable on paper. He is told this is normal aging. He is sent home with no explanation of why, no mechanism, and no path forward. That is not bad medicine in the narrow sense. It is a reflection of how slowly research reaches clinical practice. What the last 5 years of science has established is that these changes, the slow wound healing, the extended recovery, the muscle loss, are not random bad luck. They are the downstream consequences of 5 specific biological processes suppressing stem cell function. Each one has a name, each one has a mechanism, and each one has documented interventions that influence it. The research on this topic should have changed how we talk to patients years ago. Most people have never heard any of it. That gap between what the evidence shows and what people are actually told is exactly what today is about. Now, if you are someone who values understanding the why behind the numbers, not just being told what to do, what I am about to explain is going to give you a completely different framework for thinking about aging. Your stem cells are your body's maintenance crew. When a muscle fiber tears during exercise, stem cells in that muscle wake up, divide, and repair the damage. When blood cells wear out, stem cells in your bone marrow produce replacements. When the lining of your gut needs renewal, intestinal stem cells handle it. This process runs continuously, invisibly, throughout your life. Between roughly age 60 and 75, it slows down in ways that cascade into everything you feel. The critical insight from the last decade of research is this: the problem is not that the stem cells are gone, it is that the neighborhood they live in has turned toxic. Researchers call that neighborhood the stem cell niche. A healthy stem cell placed in a toxic niche will underperform. A struggling stem cell placed in a healthy niche can recover. That single finding changes the entire framework for intervention because it means the target is not the stem cell itself. The target is the environment surrounding it. There are 5 documented mechanisms creating that toxic environment. Understanding all 5 matters because each one points toward a different intervention. These are not small differences. These are fundamental biological changes, and yet most people have never been told a single word about them. The first mechanism is the one generating the most research attention right now. It involves what scientists call senescent cells. Imagine a factory floor where your stem cells are the trained workers ready to be deployed, but the floor is crowded with retired workers who refuse to leave. And they are not just standing around. They are shouting constantly, issuing contradictory instructions, creating noise and confusion that prevents the active workers from doing their jobs. That is exactly what senescent cells do. They are cells that have accumulated enough damage that they should have undergone programmed death. But instead, they get stuck. They stop dividing, but they do not die. In that stuck state, they begin secreting a cocktail of inflammatory signals called the SASP. IL-6, TNF-alpha, Illinois, 1-beta, molecules designed to clear damaged tissue. When occasional, they serve a purpose. When chronic, which is exactly what happens as we age, they poison the local environment that stem cells depend on. In 2019, a team at the Mayo Clinic published the first human clinical trial demonstrating that this toxic load is reducible. The study involved 9 older adults with diabetic kidney disease. After 3 days of treatment with specific compounds, researchers measured significant reductions in multiple SASP markers and an 8% increase in stem cell precursors available for tissue repair. Within 14 days, I want to be precise here because this is where health content often goes wrong. 9 participants, no control group, a specific patient population. The compounds used require medical supervision. This study is not a mandate to go buy anything. What it established scientifically is proof of concept. The toxic load blocking stem cell function is not fixed. It is reducible. That is the meaningful finding. The second mechanism was revealed by a 2025 paper from Mount Sinai. Every cell has an internal recycling plant, the lysosomes, that breaks down damaged proteins and worn out components so raw materials can be reused. In young cells, this system runs efficiently. In aged stem cells, it gets overwhelmed. Waste accumulates inside the cell, triggering inflammatory signals through a pathway called C-gas sting. The cell becomes increasingly toxic to itself. Think of a city whose garbage collection has fallen 3 months behind. The danger is not from something attacking from the outside. It is from the waste that should have been cleared sitting there and generating its own contamination. The Mount Sinai team corrected this dysfunction in aged blood stem cells in a laboratory setting. The treated cells recovered what researchers described as juvenile metabolism, and their capacity to produce blood and immune cells increased more than 8-fold. This was not a clinical application available today, but it establishes that the internal recycling machinery of your stem cells is a legitimate modifiable target. Specifically through autophagy, the cellular self-cleaning process activated by fasting and certain dietary compounds. I will connect those dots in the protocol section. The third mechanism explains something many people over 60 have noticed. Muscle injuries that used to resolve in days now linger for weeks. The explanation lives in a protein called cyclin D1, the alarm clock that wakes up muscle stem cells when they detect damage. In young muscle, the alarm is sensitive. Cells respond fast. In aged muscle, cyclin D1 expression declines. The alarm gets quieter. Cells fall into what researchers describe as a deeper quiescence, a sleep so deep that even strong injury signals do not reliably wake them. The critical finding, published in Nature Metabolism in 2020, is that this is not irreversible. Mice, corresponding to 60 to 70 years in humans, who engaged in voluntary aerobic exercise for 3 weeks showed restoration of cyclin D1 expression to levels comparable to young animals. Their muscle stem cells woke back up. Researchers then transferred blood from those exercise older animals into sedentary older animals who had not exercised themselves, and those sedentary animals showed the same benefit. Exercise releases circulating factors into the bloodstream that act as systemic signals improving stem cell function across the body. Your bloodstream, when you exercise consistently, becomes a pro-regenerative environment. The fourth mechanism involves your immune stem cells. Think of your immune system as an army with 2 divisions: general infantry producing rapid inflammatory responses and special forces producing long-term adaptive immunity. In younger adults, the stem cells that recruit for both divisions maintain a balanced output. In older adults, elevated hormonal signals act like a standing order of permanent high alert. And under chronic high alert, the academy overproduces infantry at the expense of special forces. You get more systemic inflammation and weaker adaptive immunity simultaneously. This is one reason older adults respond less robustly to vaccines and face higher susceptibility to infections. Research published in Cell Stem Cell demonstrated that specific fasting protocols created conditions where these immune stem cells could reset, allowing them to rebalance their output. Extended fasting at the duration used in that research is not appropriate for most people over 65 without medical supervision. But this finding provides the mechanistic basis for why more moderate time-restricted eating has biological logic behind it. The fifth mechanism ties the others together. It is called inflammaging, the chronic low-grade elevation of pro-inflammatory molecules that characterizes the aging body. IL-6, TNF-alpha, Illinois, 1-beta, the same molecules secreted by senescent cells. They accumulate in the tissues of older adults independent of any specific infection or injury, just chronically elevated, creating what researchers describe as a systemically toxic environment for stem cells across every tissue. A 2023 Stanford study, published in Cell Stem Cell, demonstrated that consistent exercise reprograms the inflammatory landscape across multiple stem cell compartments simultaneously: bone marrow, muscle, brain. The effect is systemic, and the primary mechanism is anti-inflammatory. The interventions that clean up the neighborhood may be as important as anything that acts on the stem cells directly. Here is the 5-pillar protocol, ranked by strength of evidence. Pillar 1 is aerobic exercise. This is the single intervention I can point to with genuine confidence. Not a supplement, not a protocol you pay for, moderate intensity aerobic exercise performed consistently. The mechanism is clear from multiple studies. It restores cyclin D1 in muscle stem cells, reduces SASP cytokines, and releases circulating pro-regenerative factors into the bloodstream. The dose that shows benefit is aligned with standard recommendations, at least 150 minutes per week, spread across 5 or more days, at an intensity where you can hold a conversation but you are working. Roughly 50 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. On top of aerobic work, resistance training 2 to 3 times per week directly activates muscle satellite cells and counteracts age-related muscle loss. Older adults need at least as much resistance training as younger adults, possibly more given the deeper quiescence of their satellite cells. If you have uncontrolled cardiovascular disease, severe osteoporosis, or blood pressure consistently above 160, over 100, work with your physician before intensifying exercise. Stop immediately and seek care if you experience chest pain, pressure, irregular palpitations, or dizziness disproportionate to your effort. Pillar 2 is nutrition, and the timing of when you eat matters as much as the quality of what you eat. On quality, the dietary pattern with the strongest association with reduced senescent cell burden and better physical function in older adults is the Mediterranean-style anti-inflammatory pathways that drives SASP. Fatty fish provides EPA and DHA that directly reduce IL-6 and TNF-alpha. Cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower activate the cellular self-cleaning process relevant to the lysosomal mechanism. On protein, older adults require significantly more than younger adults to maintain muscle mass and support satellite cell activation. The European Society for Clinical Nutrition recommends 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day for active older adults, with 25 to 40 grams per meal, and particular attention to the post-exercise window within 2 hours of training. On timing, a randomized controlled trial published in Aging Cell in 2024 followed adults on approximately 25% caloric restriction for 24 months. The result was significant reduction in circulating biomarkers of cellular senescence compared to the unrestricted eating control group. The practical translation is time-restricted eating. Confining your eating to an 8 to 10 hour window achieves some of the same metabolic signaling with more realistic adherence. Critical safety note: time-restricted eating is not appropriate for people with type 1 diabetes, those on insulin or sulfonylureas, those with a history of eating disorders, or those with a BMI below 20. Take this to your physician before acting on it. Pillar 3 is sleep. A 2022 review established that circadian rhythm disruption is a major mechanism of stem cell aging. The internal 24-hour clock directly governs the activation cycles of stem cells across multiple tissue types. When that clock runs poorly, stem cell function degrades. Multiple studies have associated sleep under 6 hours with accelerated cellular senescence. The protocol: 7 to 9 hours per night at consistent times, 7 nights a week, not 5 on schedule, and 2 off. Consistency appears to be as important as duration. A dark, cool sleeping environment around 18 to 20 degrees Celsius supports the deep sleep stages. And one practice that is underutilized: 15 to 20 minutes of natural morning light within the first hour of waking. This is one of the most powerful inputs for resetting the circadian clock. Pillar 4 is stress management. Chronic psychological stress elevates cortisol, which chronically activates pro-inflammatory signaling pathways, accelerating the accumulation of senescent cells and elevated SASP. Studies of mindfulness-based stress reduction have demonstrated measurable reductions in IL-6 and TNF-alpha in older adults. Social isolation is one of the most potent activators of inflammaging we know of. Population data suggests the biological effect of chronic loneliness on inflammatory markers is comparable to smoking approximately 50 15 cigarettes daily. This is not a soft lifestyle suggestion. It is a direct intervention on the inflammatory biology of stem cell aging. 10 to 20 minutes of daily breath work, specifically diaphragmatic breathing with extended exhalation, has documented effects on the autonomic nervous system that reduce the cortisol inflammatory cascade. Pillar 5 is targeted supplementation, and here I want to be more careful than most health content because the gap between what is marketed in this space and what the evidence actually supports is substantial. 3 supplements have the most legitimate evidence. Vitamin D3 deficiency, defined as serum 25 OHD below 30 nanograms per milliliter, is extremely common in adults over 50 and is associated with accelerated immune senescence and impaired stem cell function. Get your level tested before supplementing. The target range supported by the research is 40 to 60 nanograms per milliliter. Doses of 1,000 to 4,000 IU daily are typically needed to reach that range. If you take thiazide diuretics, high-dose vitamin D3 raises the risk of hypercalcemia. Your physician needs to know omega-3 fatty acids at 2 to 4 grams daily of combined EPA and DHA directly reduce the primary SASP cytokines. If you eat fatty fish twice or more per week, your dietary intake may already be sufficient. At doses above 3 grams daily, inform your physician if you take anticoagulants. There is a meaningful interaction affecting bleeding risk. On quercetin, the clinical evidence for senolytics involved a specific compound combination, not quercetin alone. Quercetin in isolation has not demonstrated significant senolytic effect in randomized controlled trials. Getting quercetin through food, capers, red onions, apples, provides meaningful polyphenol intake without interaction risks. Here is what the evidence does not support, and this matters as much as anything I have said today. There is no specific window during which this is possible and after which it closes. That framing has no scientific basis. What the evidence actually shows is this. Even in adults in their 70s and 80s, lifestyle interventions produce measurable biological benefits. Earlier is better in the sense that compounding works, but there is no cutoff. Your stem cells are not waiting for a deadline. They are responding right now to the signals your choices are sending them. Here's a realistic timeline so you know what to expect. In weeks 1 and 2, the changes are largely invisible but real. Most people notice modestly improved energy and sleep quality, reflecting the early reduction in inflammatory burden. At the 1-month mark, inflammatory biomarkers, specifically high sensitivity CRP and IL-6, typically begin to decline in response to consistent exercise and dietary change. You will not feel this day to day, but it represents the niche beginning to clean up. Months 2 and 3 bring functional improvements that are measurable: grip strength, recovery speed from exertion, the 6-minute walk test. These are downstream indicators of improving muscle stem cell responsiveness. At 6 to 12 months, the most meaningful changes accumulate. Immune function data from fasting and caloric restriction trials shows shifts consistent with partial reversal of the myeloid bias we discussed. More cells capable of responding to new threats, fewer generating chronic background inflammation. Before you close this video, here is a specific conversation to bring to your physician. Request a panel that includes a complete blood count to assess blood cell production, high sensitivity CRP as a marker of inflammaging, serum 25 OHD, vitamin D, fasting glucose, and HbA1 if your physician considers it appropriate. These give you a baseline to track against over 6 to 12 months. That data is not available from how you feel. It has to be measured. Here's the summary of what the research shows. Your stem cells are not dead after 65. They're not gone. They are present but inhibited by senescent cells poisoning their environment, by internal cellular waste accumulation, impairing their function, by the loss of the protein that wakes up muscle stem cells, by hormonal signals pushing immune stem cells toward chronic inflammation, and by a systemically elevated inflammatory background, contaminating the entire ecosystem they depend on. Each of these mechanisms is modifiable, not with a supplement that costs $200 a month, with aerobic exercise performed consistently, with a dietary pattern that reduces inflammatory burden, with sleep taken seriously as a biological necessity, with stress managed as a direct intervention on inflammatory pathways, and with evidence-graded supplementation used where the data actually supports it. The convergence of this research points clearly toward a set of behaviors that your cells are, in a meaningful biological sense, listening for. The question is what signals you are going to send them. Drop a comment right now saying aware if this gave you something real today. And think of one person you care about, someone watching their recovery time lengthen and being told it is simply aging. Send them this video right now, not later, right now. That might be the most useful thing you do today, not for yourself, but for them. Subscribe to this channel. My mission is to give you the kind of evidence-grounded health information that most people only encounter after something has already gone wrong. You deserve to know it before that happens. In my next video, I am going to cover the specific inflammatory mechanisms in cardiovascular aging, particularly how the myeloid bias we discussed today connects directly to arterial disease risk in older adults. It surprised even me. You will not want to miss it. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. The interventions discussed must be individualized based on your complete medical history, current health status, and all relevant factors. Never adjust or discontinue any medication without first consulting your healthcare provider. The information presented reflects current published research, but does not replace a thorough evaluation by a qualified medical professional.